Episode, we're talking about handling the critics. How do we handle common critical objections to creation arguments?
Right, and we're talking about Lerner's paper. And this has all of the classical arguments. For example, he claims that evolution occupies a central place and has a unifying role in the life sciences, and that creationist thinking can't help advance science, so on.
Yeah, but since he didn't define evolution properly, the claim is unsound. Certainly, it's important and obvious that things change. But what exactly would be lost from real science if evolution were disbelieved? The evolutionary theory were disbelieved. Yeah. Is it really necessary for scientists to believe that microbes changed into mice, magnolias, and man to perform research in biology, immunology, and cosmology, for example? Newton, Pasteur, Mendel, many others didn't seem to need to believe evolution to do their science.
Yeah, and I'd like to challenge Lerner to name a single discovery in his own specialty of the physics of condensed matter that had the slightest thing to do with believing that particles change into people without any intelligent guidance. I mean, the shoe's actually on the other foot here.
Right, yeah. But nevertheless, Lerner asserts, he says this: creationists have made no contribution to the progress of biology or any other of the historical sciences.
He's uninformed, obviously. Two things here. First, he acknowledges that origins research is a historical science, not a repeatable, observable, operational science, which is good. But secondly, this is a blatantly false claim. Not just a matter of opinion or interpretation. Many key aspects in biology, as well as the other major branches of modern science, were discovered by creationists. Yeah. For example, you mentioned Louis Pasteur discovered that many diseases were caused by germs and showed that life comes only from life. Gregor Mendel discovered genetics, and Carolus Linnaeus developed the modern classification system. So what is he talking about?
Yeah, and today many scientists, including biologists, contribute greatly to their field despite believing in biblical creation and disbelieving evolution. You can see a list of some of them if you go to creation.com/creation scientists. It's a huge list, including PhD scientists and researchers that believe in biblical creation.
Right, and also people that Lerner praises, you know, for their contribution to astronomy: Copernicus, Kepler, Galileo, Newton. There were also young Earth creationists.
Yes.
But he doesn't inform his readers of this, apparently.
Yeah. Many historians of a wide range of religious persuasions, from Christians to atheists, point out that the basis of modern science depends on the assumption that the universe was made by a rational, orderly creator. Yeah. An orderly universe makes perfect sense only if it were made by an orderly creator who established natural laws that don't change because God doesn't change. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. But if atheism or polytheism were true, then there's no way to deduce from these belief systems that the universe should operate according to fixed laws.
Exactly. And Genesis 1:28 gives us permission to investigate creation, unlike, say, animism or pantheism that teaches that the creation itself is divine. And since God's sovereign, he was free to create as he pleased. So where the Bible's silent, the only way to find out how his creation works is to experiment, not to rely on man-made philosophies as like the ancient Greeks did.
Right. Note that creationists regard natural laws as descriptions of the way God upholds his creation in a regular, repeatable way, while miracles are God's way of upholding his creation in a special way for special reasons.
Right. Because creation finished at the end of day 6, creationists following the Bible would expect that God has since mostly worked through natural laws, except where he's revealed in the Bible that he used a miracle. And since natural laws are descriptive, they cannot prescribe what cannot happen. They can't rule out miracles. Right. Scientific laws don't cause or forbid anything any more than the outline of a map causes the shape of a coastline. So up next, understanding the belief system behind the claims of the critics. We'll be back.
Have you ever wondered what sort of evidence would convince an atheist that the universe was designed? Scott Todd from Kansas State University gave a startling answer. Even if all the data pointed to an intelligent designer, such an hypothesis is excluded from science because it is not naturalistic. Well, candid admissions like this show us that some people will reject a designer no matter what the evidence. But recognizing design has long been a part of science. When an archaeologist finds an artifact like a piece of pottery, he knows immediately that it was designed by someone, even though he can't see the designer. So if design has no place in science, archaeologists are in serious trouble. Forensic science, who killed who, is also about recognizing the evidence of intelligent agency, proving that it was no accident. But when the evidence in science points to God being the intelligent designer, never.
Little real science, the kind of science that leads to technological advancements, that develop smartphones and cure diseases and that type of thing.
Yeah, well, as is typical with most creation critics,
yes.
Lerner's report commits the fallacy of equivocation. And this is something every biblical creationist needs to recognize in order to be able to handle critics. Equivocation is switching the meaning of the word, in this case evolution, the word evolution, partway through an argument. A common tactic is simply to produce examples of change over time. You call that evolution, and then imply that the general theory of evolution is therefore proven and creation is disproven, etc.
Right. The main scientific objection to evolution is not that changes occur through time, and it's not about the size of the change. Mm-hmm. So we would discourage the use of terms like micro and macro evolution because it can introduce confusion there. The key issue is the type of change. To change microbes into men, for example, requires that increase to the genetic information content takes place over millions of years, from 500,000 DNA letters from even the simplest self-reproducing organism that could be called life to more than about 3 billion letters stored in each human cell.
Right. How'd you get all the new information?
Yeah. How does that come about? Nothing in Lerner's paper or anywhere else provides a single example of functional new information being added to the DNA.
Right. Lerner's paper alludes to several points as evidence for evolution. However, many of them are simply examples of change over time, so these aren't disputed by creationists.
Right.
But the implication throughout is that without evolution, it would be impossible to understand that all living things reproduce, offspring are similar to but not exactly like their parents, offspring have to grow up or change and metamorphosis, etc., before reproducing themselves. There is a fit between individuals or species and their environment. Natural selection determines the differential survival of groups of organisms. So here's all these points he's making that he says evolution has to be true in order for us to be able to understand these things.
Right.
Yeah.
But Bible-believing scientists, creationists, agree with all of those things.
Exactly.
But observing the reality of these concepts doesn't depend on evolution.
That's right.
So to claim that because there is change proves information increasing change can occur is like saying that because a merchant sells goods, he can sell them for a profit.
Right.
The two are related, but just because the former happens doesn't mean the latter will. The origin of information is a major problem for evolution.
Yeah, and equivocation, it has to be exposed for what it is. These bait and switch tactics by evolutionists are, once they're exposed, most of their scientific case for the general theory of evolution collapses. And we'll be back.
How do fish survive in Antarctic waters without freezing? The answer is that their blood plasma has lots of antifreeze protein that bind to ice and prevent the crystals from growing and thus causing damage. Some evolutionists claim that this is an example of evolution in action because new DNA code has been created that codes for the antifreeze protein. But does this really support molecules to man evolution? Antifreeze proteins are quite different from the complex specific proteins found elsewhere in the fish or in our own bodies. They are simple proteins which may have arisen through the duplication of a digestive enzyme gene that lost its original function due to mutations scrambling it. Even though they fortuitously prevent ice crystals from growing, this is a very non-specific job that many different random proteins could perform. So even though antifreeze proteins help fish survive, they don't explain how complex specific proteins could arise by mutations.
To find out more from Creation Ministries International, visit our website, creation.com.
Well, if you just tuned in today, we're talking about handling the critics.
Yes, well, another thing to watch for when handling critics' arguments is checking whether to see whether they're representing creationist arguments well or whether they're simply setting up straw man arguments to knock down. For example, Lerner claims, he says this, most creationists admit the possibility of microevolution but deny that the process can proceed so as to result in diverse species, let alone the still broader spectra of living things. Straw man.
Yep.
We don't deny speciation. In fact, it's an important part of the creationist model, creationist biology. We did 2 shows on this last year, episode 19 and 20 of season 4.
Exactly. Yeah, creationists starting from the Bible believe that God created different kinds of organisms which reproduced after their kinds.
Right.
Thus, the biblical kind would have originally been distinct biological species, that is, a population of organisms that can interbreed to produce fertile offspring.
Yeah, originally.
Originally. But that can't... so they can't breed with other organisms. But creationists point out that the kind is larger than one of today's species, right? This is because each of the original kinds was created with a vast amount of genetic information. There was enough variety in the original the information in the original creatures, so that their descendants could adapt to a wide variety of environments.
Yeah, loss of information through mutations, copying mistakes, sometimes results in individuals in the same species being unable to produce offspring. At that point, a single species has become 2,
right?
As a result of degenerating change, a degenerative change, not the kind of change required to evolve particles into people, or changes in the song or color of birds might result in them no longer being able to recognize a mate, and so they no longer interbreed. Either way, a new species is formed. So each created kind may have had the same ancestor of several present-day species. Again, today, kind is not the same as species. Today.
It's important to stress that speciation has nothing to do with real evolution, because it involves sorting and loss of genetic information rather than new information. Lerner mocks the idea of kinds by claiming this. In creationist literature, however, the breadth of a kind can vary from a species to a phylum, including everything in between. But this is fallacious.
Right.
Creationists have pointed out that as long as as 2 creatures can hybridize with true fertilization, the 2 creatures are of the same kind.
Yeah, they go back to the same kind.
Yep.
Also, if 2 creatures can hybridize with a third creature, they're all members of the same kind.
Right.
Any problems with the breadth of a kind are actually due to inconsistencies in the man-made classification system, not the term kind. That is, organisms classified as different species, even different genera or higher groupings, if they can produce fertile offspring, this means that they're really the same species or really the same kind originally. And you have different, the word kind is different than the word species. That's the main thing to understand.
Right. Some atheistic skeptics have demanded that creationists should list every single kind. Of course, to even begin to do so, it'd be necessary to perform hybridization experiments on all sexually reproducing organisms. So this is pretty unreasonable.
Yeah.
And no evolutionist has ever listed all biological species anyway, as opposed to a list of organisms classified into arbitrary man-made groupings classified as species. And the skeptics' demand for a list of every single kind overlooks the fact that by definition, this isn't the only way to define these things, right? So the hybridization criteria is a far more reasonable operational definition, which could, in principle, enable researchers to, list all of the links.
Right. Lerner also mocked much the same way as the compromising apologist Hugh Ross does. He said this: in order to avoid overcrowding Noah's Ark, some creationists adhere to the biblical term kinds rather than species as the limiting barrier to evolution.
Yeah. Well, the creationist concept of kind has nothing to do with trying to fit things on the ark, but based on sound biblical exegesis and the concept of hybridization. In reality, the converse is true. Skeptics hate the creationist analysis of kinds, partly because it neutralizes skeptical attacks on the ark that try to pack in the millions of species they're always talking about, including many which are marine, invertebrate, or plant anyway. Could have survived off of the ark.
Right, yeah. It's sad seeing self-professed Christian apologists like Hugh Ross parrot these really atheistic attacks on a global flood and the ark, and resorting to long disproven notions of the fixity of species to maintain his old earth compromise.
Exactly.
We're supposed to be on the same side here, but his position is the result of not taking God's word in the way that it's written. And we'll be back with more.
What What is something that computers and humans have in common, which constantly needs upgrading in computers, but not in humans? The answer is software. You may not have realized you have software, but inside the nucleus of each of your cells, a program is written in the form of 3 billion DNA letters. Intelligent programmers write computer software, but what about living things? Evolutionists tell us that the information in the first living cell just appeared by itself with no intelligent input required. But is that possible? The answer is a resounding no. Even one of Australia's best-known scientists, Paul Davies, conceded that there is no known law of physics able to create information from nothing. And perhaps that's why, in a New Scientist article, he lamented, "How did stupid atoms spontaneously write their own software? Nobody knows."
Creation critics.
Exactly. Now, a critical concept in handling critics is understanding the belief system behind their claims.
Right.
Despite what many evolutionists claim, creationists aren't the only ones whose belief systems affect their interpretation of the data. Rather, both sides are biased here.
That's right. While Lerner's report pretends that evolution is not anti-religious, it's important to realize that the leaders of evolutionary thought were and are ardently opposed to the notion of the Christian God as revealed in the Bible.
Yeah.
You can see a who's who of evolutionists at creation.com/who's who, and you can see a list of some of them there.
Exactly. Even evolutionists themselves, like Stephen Jay Gould, have shown that, and others beside him as well, have shown that Darwin's purpose in promoting evolution was to find an alternative to the idea of a divine designer. And Richard Dawkins applauds evolution because he claims that before Darwin, it was impossible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist, as he says.
Yeah. Kansas State University immunologist Scott Todd asserted, he said this, "Even if all the data point to an intelligent designer, such an hypothesis is excluded from science because it's not naturalistic." So, okay, never mind the facts. Nature is all there is.
Right.
Naturalism is king. Naturalism defines the rules of the game that origin is played by. So the opposition to creation has nothing to do with the facts. But evidently, they need to point out that creationists refuse to play by the self-serving rules of the game formulated by materialists. This contrasts with what most people think science is all about. For example, double Nobel laureate Linus Pauling says this: "Science is the search for truth."
Right.
That's a pretty simple definition, and if you go with that, it doesn't matter what the conclusions are. So you follow the facts to their natural conclusion, whether they're naturalistic or not.
Right. So how do Lerner and others try to get around the charge that evolution is really pushing the religion of humanism? After all, the first two tenets of the Humanist Manifesto 2 from 1973, signed by many prominent evolutionists, are this. 1. Religious humanists regard the universe as self-existing and not created. Humanism believes that man is part of nature and has emerged as a result of a continuous process. Now, the current version, Humanist Manifesto 2000, was signed by the prominent evolutionary propagandist Richard Dawkins, E.O. Wilson, Richard Leakey, Moylan Matsuma, and Daniel Dennett. Well, they try to make it sound like creation is a faith system and evolution is science, but that isn't the case.
Right. Lerner himself is a member of the Bay Area Skeptics. Like all skeptical groups, it's essentially atheistic and anti-Christian. But the Bay Area Skeptics downplays this claim, saying that, they say this, "We're absolutely not a religious or anti-religious group. We respect the religions and non-religious beliefs of others and recognize that spirituality is based on faith and is not testable." Now, this is another important tactic to understand from skeptics. They have a faith-based religious belief system called humanism. Everyone has beliefs that govern how they think and live.
Exactly. So what's interesting here is to see how many Christians get sucked into this kind of thinking.
Yes,
so
a lot of them.
Yeah, science is all about naturalism, and it's what we can discover, that they've defined science that way.
Yes.
And then Christians go, oh, okay, but they don't even realize that they just cut off their own legs. If you're saying everything happened, everything we can investigate, touch, feel, smell, real science, all happens through naturalistic terms. You cannot invoke a designer. You cannot do that.
Yes.
You're actually cutting your own legs off.
If scientific investigation ends up pointing to a conclusion that is supernatural, they have to censor that out and say, well, no, we got to steer that in the direction of naturalism, because we can't go with something that's supernatural. It's a self-censoring that goes on there.
Yeah,
amazing.
But you know, these guys are willing to say that if we walk into a cave and we find like an arrowhead and we find some paintings on walls, well, we can conclude that, you know, hominid-like creatures once lived here and they intelligently did these things.
Sure.
We can recognize the design and intelligence. Yeah. But as long as a human creator could have created that. Right. But as soon as you take it one step beyond and somebody creates the human,
not supernatural.
No. Yeah. That's when you pull the brakes on here. So, this is the In the News portion of the show as we wrap up here, and it doesn't take very long. You can just get on any news website and you always see stuff about the creation-evolution debate in the news.
Yes.
And so this particular article here titled, "Scientists Say Jawbone Fragment Dating Back 2.8 Million Years, Evidence of Earlier Evolution." So here's what happens all the time. Constantly, the public is flooded with new evidence of evolution. So it just appears to people that the evidence is overwhelmingly in favor of evolution and so on, and they're just constantly inundated with it. But as we read the article here, something to notice. Notice the difference between the facts that they found.
What's actually observed.
What they've observed, what you can take, hold in your hand, test, and all that kind of stuff. And then the assumptions that they make from these things. Now, you can take facts and try to figure out things, but you know, when they're talking about science proves this and science proves that, there's a different type of proof going on here. So let's look at the difference between facts and interpretations. I'll start off. A fragment of jaw bone dating back 2.8 million years is evidence that the first humans evolved more than 400,000 years earlier than previously thought, scientists reported Wednesday. Well, we could probably start there and analyze this.
Yeah, so what did they find? It was a fragment of jawbone, right? That you can pick that up and hold it in your hand. That's the fact. Yeah. And then what's the interpretation? Dating back 2.8 million years.
Okay. How did you do that? Has anybody observed those 2.8 million years? No,
nobody was there 2.8 million years ago to see that animal die.
You're making assumptions. They're going to talk about, if you pin them down, they'd say, well, we've got these dating methods that prove it's 2.8 million years. And yet, the very next statement says that the first humans evolved more than 400,000 years earlier.
Okay, so is that a fact or is that an interpretation?
Before they got this evidence, was that date a fact? Right? Anyway. You guys are getting the idea, I hope. The fossil, which was uncovered in the Afar region in northern Ethiopia, is dated very close to the time that the human, or Homo genus or group, split away from more ape-like ancestors like Australopithecus afarensis, best known for the fossil skeleton Lucy discovered in 1974. Africa is a hotbed for human ancestor fossils, and scientists from Arizona State University have worked for years at the Ethiopia site trying to find fossils from the dimly understood period when the Homo genus arose. And our species, Homo sapiens, is the only surviving member of the group.
Okay, so there's been a lot of storytelling there, not a whole lot of facts. The jawbone, the human jawbone, was listed first there. Then it continues, the jaw fragment, which includes 5 teeth, was discovered. That's a fact, right? Yeah, okay, 5 teeth. You can see the teeth there. Was discovered in pieces one morning, January 2013, by this fella here. I can't pronounce. I'm not even going to try. An Ethiopian graduate student at Arizona State. He said he spotted the tooth poking out of the ground while looking for fossils. Okay, so there's some facts there. The guy ran along, saw the thing, and okay, there it is. Had 5 teeth. And
as you read the article, and we could continue on here, but this would be a good exercise for people to do. Do themselves. Look it up. Look at what they found and look at what the interpretation